Welcome to the shadows of a city of angels. In the post-war boom of 1947, Los Angeles was a land of promise, a place where young women from across the country flocked to see their names in lights. But beneath the neon glow of Hollywood, a darkness was festering. This is the story of the most infamous unsolved crime in American history. This is the complete documentary of the Black Dahlia. Chapter 1. The morning of January 15th. The sun rose over Los Angeles on Wednesday, January 15th, 1947, revealing a crisp, clear morning. In the quiet, developing neighborhood of Leimert Park, the streets were mostly empty. At approximately 10 a.m., a local resident named Betty Berzinger was walking south on Norton Avenue with her 3-year-old daughter. They were headed toward a shoe repair shop. As they passed a vacant lot between 39th and Coliseum Streets, Berzinger noticed something pale lying in the weeds. At first, she didn't realize she was looking at a human being. In her later statements, she described the sight as looking like a discarded store mannequin, broken in two and left among the tall grass. Curiosity led her closer, but curiosity soon turned to a primal, bone-chilling terror. It wasn't plastic. It was flesh. It was a woman, severed completely at the waist, her body posed in a way that defied nature and suggested a theatrical, horrific intent. Berzinger grabbed her daughter and ran to a nearby house to call the police, her screams puncturing the morning silence of the suburbs. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. When the Los Angeles Police Department arrived, they were met with a scene that would haunt even the most veteran detectives for the rest of their lives. The body lay just a few feet from the sidewalk. The victim was nude, lying on her back. Her body had been severed cleanly through the waist, a procedure known in medical circles as a hemicorporectomy. This wasn't a frenzied attack. It was a surgical dissection. Her lower half was positioned a foot away from her upper torso. Her arms were raised above her head, elbows bent at right angles. Her legs were spread wide, but it was the face that drew the most horror. The killer had used a sharp blade to slice 3-inch gashes from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating a permanent, macabre grin known as the Glasgow smile. Detectives noticed a chilling detail. There was almost no blood at the scene. Despite the massive trauma to the body, the grass was clean. The body appeared to have been washed, scrubbed clean of all evidence. It was clear to the investigators that the murder had taken place elsewhere. This lot was merely a stage, and the killer wanted the world to see his work. Chapter 3. Identifying the victim. At the time, the victim was a Jane Doe. The LAPD turned to a relatively new technology to identify her, the sound photo machine, a precursor to the fax. They took her fingerprints and transmitted them to the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Within 56 minutes, a match was found. The fingerprints belonged to Elizabeth Short. She had been fingerprinted in 1943 when she was arrested for underage drinking in Lompoc, California. She had also applied for a job at the commissary of the U.S. Army's Camp Cook. The world now had a name, and the press began to dig into the life of the girl who would become the Black Dahlia. Born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1924, Elizabeth was one of 5 daughters. Her father, Cleo Short, had abandoned the family during the Great Depression, faking his suicide before resurfacing in California years later. Elizabeth was a girl who sought escape. She was beautiful, with striking porcelain skin and jet black hair. She dreamed of the silver screen, but like so many others, she found that Hollywood was a city that ate its young. Chapter 4. The nickname. The moniker the Black Dahlia didn't come from the police, nor did it come from Elizabeth herself during her life. It was a creation of the media and her acquaintances. At a drugstore in Long Beach, patrons began calling her the Black Dahlia, a play on the popular 1946 film noir The Blue Dahlia. Elizabeth had a penchant for wearing black clothing, which contrasted sharply with her pale skin. After her death, the Los Angeles Examiner, led by the aggressive Agnes Underwood, seized upon the name. It was catchy. It was romantic. It turned a brutal homicide into a cinematic mystery. The press didn't just report the news. They manufactured a myth. They painted her as a man-crazy adventuress, a delinquent who prowled the bars of Main Street. This sensationalism would both help and hinder the investigation, drawing in thousands of tips while simultaneously muddying the waters with false leads. Chapter 5: The Last Scene. Reconstructing Elizabeth Short's final days was a daunting task. She had spent the months leading up to her death drifting between hotels, apartments, and the homes of brief acquaintances. On January 9th, 1947, she was seen leaving the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She had been dropped off there by Robert Red Manley, a married salesman she had been seeing. Manley claimed he watched her walk into the lobby, where she supposedly intended to meet her sister, who was visiting from out of town. But her sister wasn't there. Staff at the Biltmore remembered seeing her use the telephone. Shortly after, she was seen exiting the hotel and walking south on Olive Street. At that moment, Elizabeth Short vanished from the face of the earth. For 6 days, between January 9th and the discovery of her body on the 15th, no one can say with certainty where she was or who she was with. These missing 6 days are the black hole at the center of the mystery. What happened in those 144 hours? Was she held captive? Was she tortured? The evidence on her body would suggest a prolonged and agonizing ordeal. Chapter 6: The Autopsy. The autopsy of Elizabeth Short was performed by Dr. Frederick Newbar. His findings were a testament to human depravity. Elizabeth was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 115 pounds. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhage and shock due to concussion of the brain and lacerations of the face. She had been beaten severely about the head. There were ligature marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck, suggesting she had been bound for a significant period. The bisection of the body was the most chilling aspect. The cut was made between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. It was a clean, professional cut. There was very little bruising along the incision line, which suggested the bisection occurred after she was already dead or in a state of deep shock. Furthermore, her internal organs had been rearranged, and her stomach was empty, containing only a small amount of fecal matter, leading to disturbing theories about what she was forced to consume. The precision of the cuts led Dr. Newbar to conclude that the killer had significant surgical or anatomical knowledge. This wasn't a butcher. It was someone who knew how to navigate the human frame. Chapter 7: The Killer Speaks. On January 21st, 1947, a week after the body was found, the office of the Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call. The caller claimed to be the killer and expressed disappointment that the news coverage was dying down. He promised to send souvenirs of Elizabeth Short through the mail. On January 24th, a suspicious envelope was discovered. It was addressed using cutout letters from newspapers and magazines. Inside were Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. The items had been cleaned with gasoline, just as the body had been, leaving no fingerprints. A series of letters followed, signed the Black Dahlia, Avenger. One note read, "Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia, Avenger. The killer never showed. He was playing a game with the LAPD, a game of cat and mouse that he was winning." The letters provided a window into the killer's mind. Arrogant, calculated, and deeply narcissistic. Chapter 8: The Suspects, Red Manley and Mark Hansen. The investigation initially focused on the men in Elizabeth's life. Robert Red Manley was the last person known to have seen her alive. He was interrogated extensively and passed 2 polygraph tests. His alibi for the time of the murder was solid. He was eventually cleared, though the trauma of the investigation and the public scrutiny contributed to a later mental breakdown. Then there was Mark Hansen. He was the owner of the Florentine Gardens nightclub and a local player in the Hollywood scene. Elizabeth had stayed at his home, and his address book was in the package sent by the killer. Hansen had a motive. Elizabeth had reportedly rejected his sexual advances. However, despite intense surveillance and questioning, the police could never find physical evidence linking him to the crime. He remained a person of interest for years, but the trail eventually went cold. As the list of suspects grew to over 150 men, the LAPD found themselves drowning in a sea of false confessions and circumstantial evidence. Chapter 9. The Shadow of George Hodel. Decades after the murder, a new and compelling suspect emerged, one that many believe is the true Black Dahlia Avenger. Dr. George Hodel was a brilliant, highly educated physician who ran a clinic for sexually transmitted diseases in Los Angeles. He was a part of the city's intellectual and artistic elite, rubbing shoulders with the likes of Man Ray and John Huston. In the late 1940s, Hodel was actually a prime suspect. The LAPD had bug his home, a sprawling, Frank Lloyd Wright design mansion known as the Soden House. In the recordings, Hodel was heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." His secretary had died of a suspicious drug overdose shortly after the murder. Hodel's son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD homicide detective, spent years investigating his father. He discovered photographs in his father's private collection that appeared to be of Elizabeth Short. Even more damning was George Hodel's medical background. He was trained in the specific surgical technique used to bisect the body, a technique taught in medical schools in the 1930s. Why wasn't he arrested? Some believe Hodel had the goods on city officials, using his clinic's records of their STDs as blackmail to ensure his protection. Chapter 10. Other Theories and Dead Ends. While George Hodel is the most famous suspect, he is not the only one. Some pointed to William Aarons, the lipstick killer of Chicago, though he was in prison at the time of Short's death. Others suggested Leslie Dillon, a bellhop and aspiring writer who had written to the LAPD about the case, demonstrating an uncanny knowledge of details not yet made public. Dillon was briefly detained, but a power struggle between the LAPD and the district attorney's office led to his release and a lawsuit. Then there was the Cleveland torso killer theory. Between 1934 and 1938, a serial killer in Ohio had decapitated and dismembered at least 12 victims. The surgical precision and the posing of the bodies bore a striking resemblance to the Black Dahlia case. Could the killer have moved west? The lead investigator in Cleveland, Elliot Ness, believed there was a connection, but the link remained unproven. Each new theory seemed to bring more questions than answers, and as the years turned into decades, the witnesses died and the evidence decayed. Chapter 11. The Legacy of a Ghost. Elizabeth Short never became the movie star she dreamed of being. Instead, she became a permanent fixture of American folklore. Her death marked the end of the post-war innocence in Los Angeles. It exposed the rot beneath the palm trees and the vulnerability of those who came to Hollywood seeking a dream. The case changed how the LAPD handled homicides, leading to the creation of more specialized units and better interagency cooperation. But for all the progress in forensics and criminal profiling, the Black Dahlia remains a void. She is a symbol of the girl who didn't make it, a cautionary tale that has inspired countless books, films, and songs. The fascination with her case lies in its contradictions, the beauty of the victim versus the brutality of the crime, the public nature of the body versus the absolute secrecy of the killer. Chapter 12. Final Reflections. As we look back at the case of the Black Dahlia, we are forced to confront the limits of justice. In a vacant lot on Norton Avenue, a young woman's life was stolen in the most horrific way imaginable. Her killer, whoever he was, walked the streets of Los Angeles, perhaps for years, carrying the secret of those 6 missing days. He may have been a doctor, a businessman, or a drifter. He may have lived a long life, never answering for his depravity. But Elizabeth Short, in a tragic irony, achieved a level of immortality that very few ever reach. She is remembered not for her life, but for the mystery of her end. Until a piece of definitive DNA evidence surfaces, or a long-hidden confession is found, she will remain a ghost in the machinery of Hollywood history. The Black Dahlia, forever young, forever beautiful, and forever unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows. If you found this documentary compelling, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most chilling mysteries. Until next time, stay vigilant.